Dawn breaks cold and gray over the Tower of London, its ancient stones shrouded in mist. The city beyond is just beginning to stir, but within the fortress walls, a different kind of silence reigns, a silence heavy with dread, anticipation, and the weight of history. In a small, sparsely furnished chamber, Anne Boleyn sits awake, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the faint light creeping across the floor. She has not slept. All night, the sounds of distant footsteps, muffled prayers, and the restless shifting of guards have kept her company. Now, as the first birds begin to sing, Anne knows her time is almost up. Outside her window, the scaffold is being prepared. The executioner, brought from France for his skill and speed, sharpens his sword in the courtyard below. Courtiers and officials gather in hushed clusters, their faces pale and drawn. Some are here out of duty, others out of morbid curiosity, and a few, her enemies, out of satisfaction. The air is thick with rumors, that Anne will confess, that she will curse the king, that a miracle might yet save her. But Anne herself is calm, her composure a final act of defiance in a world that has turned against her. As she dresses for the last time, choosing a simple gown of gray damask and a cloak of ermine, Anne's thoughts race. She remembers the dazzling heights of her queenship, the love and ambition that brought her here, and the betrayals that sealed her fate. She prays for her daughter, Elizabeth, for her family, and, astonishingly, for Henry, the husband who has condemned her. Every moment is charged with meaning, every gesture a farewell. The tower's great doors will soon open, and Anne will walk to her death before a crowd hungry for spectacle and justice. But what really happened on that morning? What did Anne see, feel, and say as she faced the end? And why does her story still haunt us, centuries later? Stay with us, because the truth behind Anne Boleyn's execution is more chilling and more human than any legend. Anne Boleyn's story did not begin in the shadow of the scaffold, but in the sunlit halls of Hever Castle, her family's ancestral home. Born into a world of privilege but not of royalty, Anne was raised with the expectation that she would serve the ambitions of her family. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was a skilled diplomat, and her mother, Elizabeth Howard, came from one of England's most powerful noble houses. From an early age, Anne was taught to navigate the treacherous waters of court life, learning French, music, dance, and the art of conversation. She was clever, quick-witted, and strikingly beautiful, with dark eyes that seemed to see through the masks of those around her. Anne's education took her to the glittering courts of the Netherlands and France, where she absorbed the sophistication and intrigue of Renaissance Europe. She returned to England more polished and ambitious than ever, quickly catching the eye of courtiers and, eventually, the king himself. Henry VIII was captivated by Anne's intelligence and charm, so different from the demure women of his court. She refused to become his mistress, holding out for something more, a crown. It was a gamble that would change the course of history. Their courtship was a storm of passion, politics, and rivalry. Henry's obsession with and grew as his marriage to Catherine of Aragon crumbled, and became the focal point of a national crisis, her every move scrutinized by friends and enemies alike. She was blamed for the king's break with Rome, the dissolution of monasteries, and the birth of the Church of England. Yet, for all the power she seemed to wield, and was always vulnerable, her position dependent on the king's favor and the shifting alliances of the court. Anne's ascent to the throne was both triumph and tragedy. Crowned queen in a lavish ceremony, she was hailed as the mother of England's future. But the birth of her daughter, Elizabeth, was a disappointment to a king desperate for a male heir. The court, once dazzled by Anne's wit and beauty, turned against her. Old rivals resurfaced, whispering rumors of witchcraft, adultery, and treason. Even her allies began to distance themselves, sensing the winds of change. Yet, Anne was not merely a victim of circumstance. She was a woman of extraordinary ambition, intelligence, and resilience. She championed religious reform, patronized artists and scholars, and fought fiercely for her daughter's rights. She made enemies, yes, but she also inspired loyalty and admiration. Her rise was a testament to the power of will and the dangers of standing too close to the throne. As Anne's star rose, so did the stakes. The court became a battlefield, every gesture a potential weapon, every word a test of loyalty. Anne's love for Henry, once her greatest strength, became her greatest vulnerability. The same passion that had lifted her to the heights of power would soon become the force that dragged her down. And as the king's affections cooled and the whispers grew louder, Anne's world began to close in around her. What was it like to be Anne Boleyn at the height of her power, loved, envied, and feared in equal measure? And how did the ambitions that made her queen also set her on the path to destruction? In the next section, we'll see how the tides of fortune turned, and how the seeds of betrayal and tragedy were sown in the very heart of the Tudor court. Anne Boleyn's reign as queen was as dazzling as it was precarious. From the moment she set foot in the royal apartments, she was surrounded by rivals, some old, some newly emboldened by her rapid ascent. The English court was a nest of ambition, and Anne's presence at its center was both a beacon and a threat. For every friend she made, she earned two enemies: noblewomen who resented her influence, courtiers who had lost favor, and powerful families who saw her as an upstart interloper. Even the common people, once enchanted by her beauty and wit, began to murmur that Anne was a witch, a seductress, or worse. The birth of Elizabeth, rather than the longed-for son, was the first crack in Anne's armor. Henry's disappointment was palpable, and the court's whispers grew louder. When Anne suffered a series of miscarriages, the rumors took on a darker tone. Some claimed she was cursed, others that she had bewitched the king, and still others that her bloodline was tainted. The old queen, Catherine of Aragon, and her daughter Mary remained symbols of the true royal line, and their supporters seized every opportunity to undermine Anne's position. But it was not just personal animosity that threatened Anne. The political landscape was shifting beneath her feet. Thomas Cromwell, once her ally in the break with Rome, began to see Anne as an obstacle to his own ambitions. The king's eye wandered, and Jane Seymour, demure, obedient, and everything Anne was not, caught his attention. Cromwell, sensing an opportunity, began to orchestrate Anne's downfall with ruthless efficiency. He gathered evidence, real and fabricated, of Anne's supposed infidelities and treasonous plots. He whispered in the king's ear, stoking Henry's insecurities and fears. The rumors became accusations, and was said to have taken lovers among the king's closest friends and even her own brother. The charges were shocking, but in the fevered atmosphere of the court, they were all too believable. Old rivals resurfaced, eager to testify against her, and former allies melted away, unwilling to risk their own positions. The machinery of Anne's destruction was set in motion, and she found herself increasingly isolated, her every move watched and reported. The psychological toll was immense, and once the most confident woman at court became anxious and defensive. She argued with Henry, pleaded her innocence, and tried to rally her remaining supporters. But the king, worn down by years of disappointment and manipulation, was no longer listening. The court, sensing blood in the water, turned on Anne with a ferocity that was both personal and political. Her ladies-in-waiting were interrogated, her private correspondence seized, and her every word twisted into evidence of guilt. Yet, even as the walls closed in and refused to go quietly, she confronted her accusers with courage and wit, denying the charges and demanding justice. She prayed for her daughter, for her family, and, perhaps most heartbreakingly, for the king who had once loved her. But the outcome was never in doubt. The forces arrayed against her were too powerful. The king's will too set. Anne's fall from grace was as swift as her rise had been meteoric. As Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower, the court buzzed with speculation. Who would be next? What secrets would be revealed? And what would become of the woman who had dared to defy the most powerful man in England? The stage was set for betrayal, heartbreak, and a trial that would shock the world. In the next section, we'll follow Anne into the shadows of the Tower, where the true cost of ambition and the dangers of royal favor would be laid bare. The day of Anne Boleyn's arrest began like any other, but the air in the palace was thick with tension. Whispers darted through the corridors, and the usual bustle of courtiers felt strangely subdued. Anne sensed the change, but she could not have known how quickly her world was about to collapse. The king, who had once moved heaven and earth to make her his queen, had grown distant and cold. Now, his silence was more terrifying than any outburst. It was Thomas Cromwell who orchestrated the final act. With the king's blessing, he set his plan in motion, summoning the king's guards and trusted officials. and was at Greenwich Palace watching a game of tennis when the summons came. She was to present herself before the Privy Council. The message was delivered with icy formality, and Anne's heart pounded as she realized something was terribly wrong. She was escorted away, her friends and ladies-in-waiting left behind, their faces pale with fear. The council chamber was a theater of accusation. Cromwell, flanked by Anne's enemies, read out the charges: adultery, incest, and conspiracy against the king. The words hung in the air, absurd and devastating. Anne protested her innocence, her voice steady but her hands trembling. She demanded to see the king, to confront her accusers, but her pleas were ignored. The council had already decided her fate. She was placed under arrest and informed she would be taken to the Tower of London. The journey to the Tower was a descent into nightmare, and was rowed down the Thames in a small barge, the same route she had taken years before as a triumphant queen. Now, the cheers of the crowd were replaced by the jeers of onlookers, and the river seemed colder, the city more hostile. As the Tower's forbidding walls loomed into view, Anne's composure began to crack. She wept, prayed, and tried to steel herself for what was to come. Inside the Tower, Anne was led to the same royal apartments she had once occupied before her coronation. The irony was not lost on her. The rooms, once filled with hope and celebration, now felt like a tomb. She was cut off from her family, her friends, and her daughter. Her ladies-in-waiting were carefully chosen by her enemies, instructed to watch her every move and report her every word. Anne's world shrank to a few cold chambers and the echo of her own thoughts. The psychological impact of betrayal was profound, and replayed every conversation, every gesture, searching for the moment when her fate had been sealed. She wondered who had turned against her. Was it a trusted friend, a jealous rival, or someone she had never suspected? The uncertainty gnawed at her, fueling her fear and despair. She prayed for strength, for justice, for a sign that she was not entirely alone. Yet, even in her darkest moments, Anne refused to surrender to despair. She wrote letters to Henry, to her family, and to anyone who might intercede on her behalf. She maintained her dignity before her captors, refusing to confess to crimes she had not committed. But the isolation was crushing, and the knowledge that her enemies had triumphed was a wound that would not heal. As the days passed, Anne's hope faded. The Tower's walls seemed to close in, and the future narrowed to a single, terrifying point. She knew that her trial would be a spectacle, that her enemies would stop at nothing to see her destroyed. But she also knew that her story was not yet over. In the next section, we'll enter the courtroom where Anne would face her accusers, and where the final act of betrayal and injustice would play out before the eyes of the world. Anne Boleyn's trial was less a search for truth than a carefully staged performance, designed to satisfy the king's will and the court's hunger for spectacle. The great hall of the Tower was transformed into a theater of accusation, its stone walls echoing with the murmurs of courtiers, nobles, and commoners alike. The air was thick with anticipation, curiosity, and a sense of inevitability. Everyone knew the outcome before a word was spoken, but few could resist the drama of a queen on trial for her life. Anne entered the hall with her head held high, her composure a silent rebuke to those who had come to see her fall. She wore a simple gown, her dark hair covered by a modest hood, and her eyes, once the spark of Henry's obsession, were clear and unflinching. She faced a jury of her peers, but there was no hope of mercy. Many of the men who sat in judgment had once courted her favor. Now, they were eager to distance themselves from her disgrace. The charges against Anne were as sensational as they were unfounded: adultery with multiple men, incest with her own brother, and a plot to murder the king. The evidence was flimsy, built on rumors, coerced confessions, and the fevered imaginations of her enemies. Witnesses contradicted themselves, and the timeline of alleged affairs was riddled with impossibilities. Yet, the machinery of justice ground on, indifferent to logic or fairness, and defended herself with remarkable courage and wit. She denied every accusation, challenging her accusers to produce real proof. She spoke eloquently of her loyalty to the king, her love for her daughter, and her faith in God. Her words moved some to tears, but the outcome was never in doubt. The court had been instructed to find her guilty, and the verdict was a foregone conclusion. For Anne's supporters, the trial was a nightmare. Her family watched in horror as their daughter and sister was paraded before the world as a criminal. Her ladies-in-waiting, forced to testify against her, wept in the shadows. Even some of her former rivals were unsettled by the speed and ferocity of her downfall. The message was clear. No one, not even a queen, was safe from the king's wrath. The emotional toll on Anne was immense. She maintained her dignity in public, but in private, the strain showed. She prayed for strength, comforted her ladies, and tried to prepare herself for the end. She worried for her daughter, Elizabeth, and for the legacy she would leave behind. Yet, even as the walls closed in, Anne refused to confess to crimes she had not committed. Her courage in the face of humiliation became her final act of defiance. The trial ended as it had begun, with spectacle and certainty, and was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. The court, having played its part, dispersed, leaving Anne to face her fate alone. But the echoes of her words, her courage, and her suffering lingered in the hall long after the verdict was read. As Anne awaited her execution, the city buzzed with rumors and speculation. What would her final words be? Would she forgive her enemies, or curse the king who had destroyed her? In the next section, we'll enter Anne's final night in the Tower, where faith, despair, and the search for meaning would shape her last hours and set the stage for one of history's most haunting farewells. As darkness settled over the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn faced her last night on earth. The city outside was restless, but within the cold stone walls, time seemed to slow and thicken. Anne's small chamber was lit by a single candle, its flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. She knelt in prayer, her hands clasped tightly, her lips moving in silent supplication. Faith had always been her refuge, but now, as the end drew near, it was both a comfort and a torment. She prayed for her daughter, Elizabeth, for her family, and even for Henry, the man who had once loved her and now condemned her. Her ladies-in-waiting, loyal to the end, kept vigil by her side. They wept quietly, trying to hide their grief, but Anne saw their pain and tried to comfort them. She spoke gently, thanking them for their service and urging them to remember her not as a queen brought low, but as a woman who had loved, fought, and endured. She asked them to care for Elizabeth, to tell her daughter the truth of her mother's love and innocence. The bond between Anne and her ladies was deep, forged in the crucible of the court and now tested in the shadow of death, and spent part of the night writing letters, one to Henry, pleading for mercy for her family, another to her brother's widow, offering forgiveness and hope. Her words were measured, dignified, and heartbreakingly human. She confessed her fears, her regrets, and her longing for peace. She asked for prayers, not just for herself, but for all those who suffered injustice and betrayal. Each letter was a farewell, a final attempt to shape her legacy and protect those she loved. As the hours passed, Anne's composure wavered. She wept for her lost future, for the child she would never see grow up, for the friends who had abandoned her, and for the dreams that had turned to dust. Yet, even in her despair, she found moments of grace. She forgave her enemies, prayed for her executioner, and tried to prepare herself for the ordeal to come. She asked her ladies to help her dress in the morning, choosing a simple gown and a cloak of dignity for her final walk. The night was long, filled with memories and prayers, but Anne did not face it alone. Her ladies sang hymns, recited psalms, and held her hands as the candle burned low. Together, they faced the darkness, drawing strength from each other and from the hope that Anne's suffering would not be in vain. The tower itself seemed to mourn, its ancient stones bearing silent witness to the courage and sorrow within. As dawn approached, Anne rose and looked out the narrow window at the gray sky. She knew what awaited her: the scaffold, the crowd, the sharp blade of the French sword. But she also knew that her story was not yet finished. The world would remember her final words, her composure, and the injustice she endured. The details of her execution, the calm with which she faced death, the prayers she whispered, the dignity she maintained, would haunt all who witnessed them. What did Anne say as she stepped onto the scaffold? How did she face the executioner's blade? And what echoes of her final moments still linger in the tower's stones? In the next section, we'll walk with Anne to the place of her death and witness the haunting scene that would change England and history forever. The morning of May 19th, 1536, dawned with a chill that seemed to seep into the very stones of the tower. Word had spread quickly: today, the Queen of England would die. By the time Anne Boleyn was led from her chamber, a crowd had already gathered on Tower Green. Courtiers, soldiers, servants, and a handful of Londoners pressed close, their faces a mix of curiosity, pity, and grim satisfaction. Some had come to witness justice, others to see a spectacle, but all would leave changed by what they saw. And walked with surprising composure, her back straight, her gaze steady. She wore a simple gray gown and a cloak of ermine, her dark hair tucked beneath a white coif. Her ladies-in-waiting followed, struggling to hold back tears. As in past, some in the crowd averted their eyes, while others stared openly, searching her face for fear or regret. She paused briefly, looking up at the sky, then continued toward the scaffold, a low platform draped in black, surrounded by guards and the silent, hooded figure of the French executioner. The air was thick with tension. The king was not present, nor were most of the court's great lords. Instead, and faced a sea of strangers and a handful of former friends, their loyalties now uncertain. The executioner, renowned for his skill and mercy, waited with his sword hidden behind his back, a final kindness, so Anne would not see the blade that would end her life. The chaplain murmured prayers, and Anne knelt, her hands folded, her lips moving in silent supplication. When she rose and addressed the crowd with a calm, clear voice, she did not protest her innocence or curse her enemies. Instead, she spoke of her loyalty to the king, her hope for his future, and her faith in God's mercy. Her words were dignified, even gracious, a final act of courage that silenced even the most hardened onlookers. She forgave those who had condemned her, asked for prayers, and commended her soul to God. The moments that followed were etched into the memory of all who witnessed them, and removed her cloak and coif, revealing the slender neck that had once been adorned with jewels. Her ladies stepped forward, tying a blindfold over her eyes and helping her kneel. The executioner knelt before her, asking her forgiveness, a ritual that Anne granted with a gentle nod. She knelt upright, her posture composed, her hands folded in prayer. The crowd held its breath. The executioner called for his sword, distracting and with a whispered word. In a single, swift motion, the blade flashed and fell. Anne's body crumpled, and the green was stained with the blood of a queen. For a moment, there was only silence, a stunned, reverent hush that seemed to hang in the air long after the deed was done. The emotional impact was immediate and profound. Some wept openly, others turned away in horror. Even the guards, hardened by years of service, were shaken by Anne's composure and the swiftness of her death. Her ladies collapsed in grief, gathering her body and wrapping it in a white cloth. The crowd dispersed slowly, many unable to speak, haunted by the image of a woman who had faced her end with dignity and grace. Anne's execution was more than a political act. It was a moment of collective reckoning. It exposed the fragility of power, the dangers of ambition, and the human cost of royal intrigue. For those who witnessed it, the memory would linger, a ghostly presence in the tower, a warning to all who dared to reach too high. And for England, the death of Anne Boleyn marked the end of an era and the beginning of a legend that would haunt the nation for centuries. As the tower returned to silence, the world outside began to reckon with what had happened within its walls. In the next section, we'll explore the shockwaves that rippled through England and history, and the ways Anne's death changed the fate of a kingdom and the course of the world. Anne Boleyn's execution sent shockwaves through England, reverberating far beyond the walls of the tower. In the immediate aftermath, the court scrambled to erase her memory. Her belongings were seized, her portraits removed, and her name spoken only in whispers. Henry VIII, who had once risked everything for Anne, moved with chilling speed to distance himself from her legacy. Within days, he was betrothed to Jane Seymour, as if the queen's death had been nothing more than a necessary step toward a new beginning. To some, Henry's haste was a sign of relief. To others, it was a mark of guilt that would never quite fade. For Anne's family, the loss was devastating. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, retreated from court, his ambitions shattered and his reputation stained. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, withdrew into grief, and her brother's execution alongside and left the family line broken. Yet, the greatest blow fell on Anne's daughter, Elizabeth. Stripped of her title and declared illegitimate, the infant princess was left vulnerable in a court that now viewed her as a living reminder of her mother's disgrace. Few could have imagined that this child, born in scandal and shadow, would one day become one of England's greatest monarchs. The English people, too, were divided in their response. Some saw Anne's death as justice, a necessary end to a queen who had dared to challenge tradition and the king's will. Others mourned her as a victim of courtly intrigue and royal caprice, a woman destroyed by forces beyond her control. Ballads and poems circulated, some condemning Anne as a witch, others lamenting her fate with genuine sorrow. The spectacle of her execution lingered in the public imagination, a haunting reminder of the dangers of ambition and the fickleness of power. In the long term, Anne's execution changed the course of English history. It marked a turning point in Henry's reign, hardening his resolve and deepening his suspicion of those around him. The break with Rome, already underway, accelerated as Henry sought to consolidate his authority and control the church. The precedent set by Anne's downfall, of a queen tried and executed on dubious charges, would echo in the fates of other wives and courtiers, fueling an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty at court. Anne's death also became a cautionary tale, a story retold for generations as a warning against the perils of ambition, the dangers of royal favor, and the high cost of challenging the established order. Yet, her legacy was not only one of tragedy. Through her daughter Elizabeth, Anne's bloodline would shape the destiny of England, ushering in an era of cultural flourishing and national pride. The memory of Anne Boleyn, her intelligence, her courage, her refusal to be silenced, endured, inspiring writers, artists, and reformers who saw in her story a symbol of resilience and the enduring struggle for justice. As the centuries passed, Anne's execution became more than a historical event. It became a lens through which to examine the complexities of power, gender, and the human heart. Her story, at once deeply personal and profoundly political, continues to haunt and fascinate, a reminder that the past is never truly past, and that the lessons of history are written not only in triumph, but in loss. In our final reflection, we'll consider what Anne's fate reveals about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of empathy, and the need to remember those whose voices were silenced. Anne Boleyn's story is more than a tale of royal intrigue and personal tragedy. It is a haunting meditation on the dangers of unchecked power and the human cost of ambition. Her rise and fall reveal how quickly favor can turn to suspicion, and how easily a woman's voice can be drowned out by the machinery of politics, rumor, and fear. Anne was brilliant, passionate, and flawed. She was a woman who dared to reach for more than her world allowed, and she paid the ultimate price for her defiance. Her execution was not just the end of a queen, but a warning to all who would challenge the status quo. It exposed the fragility of justice in a world where power is absolute and mercy is a matter of convenience. The spectacle of Anne's death, her composure, her final words, her dignity in the face of humiliation, reminds us that history is shaped not only by the victors, but by those who suffer in silence. The ghost of Anne Boleyn lingers in the tower, not as a figure of vengeance, but as a symbol of resilience and the enduring need to remember those whose stories were nearly erased. In every age, there are voices that go unheard, ambitions that are punished, and injustices that are justified in the name of order or tradition. Anne's fate urges us to look beyond the headlines and the legends, to seek out the truth in the shadows, and to honor the courage of those who refuse to be silenced. Her story is a call to empathy, to vigilance, and to the belief that even in the darkest moments, dignity and hope can endure. As we close this chapter, let us remember Anne Boleyn not just as a queen who lost her crown, but as a woman who changed the course of history, and whose ghost still asks us to listen, to question, and to never forget the cost of injustice. Now that you've walked through the final days of Anne Boleyn, ask yourself, what would you have done in her place? Would you have fought back, tried to escape, or faced your fate with the same composure and courage? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. Your perspective helps us all see history through new eyes and keeps the conversation alive. If Anne's story left you questioning the true cost of ambition, power, and injustice, you're not alone. Join our community of curious minds by subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss a story that history tried to bury. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, the past is full of secrets waiting to be uncovered.